You probably think Visual Studio is your tool of choice, and it probably is. And there's no reason to try other development tools, right? Well, you're probably right, except you're not quite right. Visual Studio 2010 provides complete and really robust support for creating XAML applications, but there's no designer support for some important capabilities like storyboards and timelines for animations. And gradients. Working with gradients is a pain in Visual Studio. These are just a few of the things that Visual Studio should do for dealing with XAML, but doesn't. Instead, you could look at Expression Blend. Expression Blend is a separate Microsoft product, which is part of the Expression suite of designer products, and it provides more graphic-based tools for working with XAML. For more information, visit microsoft.com/expression. There you can find out all about the various bits of the Expression suite and Expression Blend. If you go to the website, you'll find marketing descriptions of the top 10 new Expression Blend features. I'm assuming maybe you've looked at a previous version of Blend, but Expression 4, which is pretty new as I'm going through this material, is brand new. And there are many reasons to use this new version. First of all, SketchFlow. I really like SketchFlow. It makes it easy to generate prototypes in a visual manner. You can demonstrate and iterate on the application flow, screen layouts, and functionality without writing any code. It doesn't generate the application. This isn't a code generator. But what it does, it allows you to sketch up and create something you can hand out to developers or to other developers to implement. It makes it easy to create the specification for your application. You can enable interactivity without writing code in Blend. There are built-in drag-and-drop behaviors, much like macros in Microsoft Access. These are powerful building blocks of interactivity, and as a developer, you personally might rather write code. But for designers, it's an easy way to get applications mocked up and running without having to write any code. Blend can help you accelerate the creation of user interface with sample data. That is, Expression Blend can provide sample data for testing, and it's easy to switch to live data when you're ready. Blend makes it easy to utilize design assets. You can import Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator files if you're moving from those products, or if you have artists who use those products to create assets and you want to include them as part of your XAML-based application. Blend includes code editing with IntelliSense. You'll find full support for XAML, Visual Basic, and C#, including IntelliSense. On the other hand, it's easier and better to use Visual Studio if you have it, and I assume you do if you're here. The code editor is much better there. And as you'll see, we can easily integrate Expression Blend with Visual Studio, making the best of both products. But if you just want to rip out some code quickly, you can do it from within Expression Blend. Expression Blend supports styling and customization. You can use powerful template editing, making it easy to create reusable components in Expression Blend. Of course, Expression Blend supports both Silverlight and WPF. It also has an improved user interface, which is good because I looked at prior versions of Blend and the interface was, at best, kind of funky. Now it almost works like other Microsoft products. There's still some weird little things, as you'll see, but it does sport an improved user interface. The current version's user interface has been improved from previous versions. Now you have direct selection of objects, application shortcuts, customization of your panel layouts, and improved animation control. We'll look at all those things as we go through our demonstration. On the other hand, it still requires some getting used to. You'll need to spend some time with Expression Blend to get used to it. Expression Blend can integrate with Team Foundation Server. It fully supports working in a team environment with version control. And it supports desktop and rich application workflow. Designers and developers can work together. You can share projects, code, and designs. Expression Blend, Visual Studio, WPF, and Silverlight all share the same technology, so you can switch easily from one product to another. Well, enough of the marketing talk. Why should you use Expression Blend? There are two main scenarios when Expression Blend makes sense, at least to me. When you're working with complex graphics, including gradients, or if you're working with animations and transforms. In both those cases, from my experience, Blend makes your life easier. Expression Blend handles both of these things better than Visual Studio does. I do want to mention Expression Blend in SketchFlow. SketchFlow really is beyond the scope of this course. It really isn't a development topic, except from the fact that you're creating a mock-up of your application. It's not a real application, it's just a mock-up, but you can do great things with SketchFlow. It's an exciting mock-up and planning tool, and it makes it easy to create modifiable design plans. You can export your plan to a Word document for distribution to designers and developers. It basically creates the outline of your spec for you. If you want more information, go to this site, microsoft.com/expression/products/sketchflow_overview.aspx. At least that's where it was when I was looking for it. And you'll find some nice tutorials and videos that walk you through using SketchFlow. If you have to create applications, and who doesn't, and if you're creating specifications for those applications, and you better be, this is a very useful tool for helping you plan your applications. The Expression Blend user interface is very different from what you're used to in Visual Studio. It's worth taking some time to investigate the various parts of this development environment. It's a huge, complex product. You're not going to learn it in an hour. It's just as complex and rich as is Visual Studio 2010, so you can't learn all there is to know in a single module. Instead, we're going to focus on some of the features you'll need to become facile working with Expression Blend, and you'll need to spend some time exploring Expression Blend once we're done. How do you get this thing? Well, the simplest way to get it is to download it as part of an MSDN subscription. It's also available as part of TechNet. You can also purchase it separately or as part of the Expression Suite. But before you can follow through this demo that I'm going to show, you'll need to have a copy of Expression Blend installed, and there is no free version of Expression Blend. Well, let's start out by creating a new project in Expression Blend and look at some of the basic features of working with Expression Blend. I've started Expression Blend, and the first thing I see is this welcome screen. Here you can choose Help. You can look at samples, and I suggest you do investigate these samples. They're pretty useful when trying to learn Silverlight or WPF and XAML and Blend all at the same time. We can choose Projects, and I'll come here and choose a new project. I can choose Silverlight or WPF. And within WPF, you can choose various kinds of applications, including a SketchFlow application. I'll name this application Hello Blend. I'll put it in my samples folder, and I'll click OK, and I create my project. This displays lots of panels, panes, windows, and so on, but the one we most care about is the artboard. This area here where we're going to lay out our application. Expression Blend supports three different views of your workspace. There's Design View, there's Split View, and there's XAML View, much like Visual Studio. The default is Design View, and you can switch to others using View, Active Document View. You can also use shortcut buttons in the Designer, as you'll see. Most work requires only Design View. Unlike Visual Studio, where most of your work is done in the markup itself, in Blend, although you can look at the XAML, you generally don't need to. But don't forget, all you're doing is creating XAML, and it might be interesting to look and see what it is that you're creating. Well, let's take a look at the three different views in Expression Blend. Right now, I'm looking at Design View. If I want to look at XAML View, I should probably put something on here first, and I'll do that by just selecting a rectangle and drawing it on. And now if I switch to XAML View, you see it's the same old XAML you'd expect. There's a grid, there's a rectangle, and so on. I can also go to Split View and see both at the same time. Again, while working in Blend, I very seldom needed to look at the XAML, so I generally stay in Design View, which makes it easier to work with the design surface. You can also get there by using View, Active Document View, and choose an option from here. Obviously, there's a shortcut key as well to switch the active document view, and you can use that instead if you'd prefer. One thing to note, by the way, I just fell for this, is unlike Visual Studio, when you select a tool, it becomes selected until you tell Blend otherwise. I never went back for the selection tool, so it kept creating rectangles. Let me get rid of all of these so we can start fresh in our next demonstration. To make it easier to work on different types of projects, Expression Blend supports workspaces. These are named layouts for the panels and tools, and it's a good thing they're there because there are so many panels and tools you could go nuts trying to keep track of them all. By default, there are two built-in workspaces. There's one for design and a separate one for animation. Once we work with animation in Blend, you'll see why there's a different workspace for that, because you want the timeline to appear in a horizontal fashion. You can select Window and then Workspaces to choose either workspace, or press F6 to switch back and forth between them. You can reset the current workspace by choosing Control-Shift-R, or you can save the current layout as a new workspace. Let's take a moment and investigate workspaces in Expression Blend. Right now I'm using the Design workspace, but I can switch the workspace by choosing Window, Workspaces, and switch to a different workspace. Watch what happens when I choose Animation. Everything readjusts. The Objects and Timeline panel moved down here, the Projects panel moved over here, and so on. And we can toggle back and forth between them by using the F6 key. Here I'm pressing the F6 key, I'm toggling back and forth. You may not understand why you'd want the different layouts now, but I'm sure in Visual Studio you've wanted a way to lay out the windows just the way you want them and save that window layout and be able to get back to it later. Here we can also modify the layout. I can put projects over here, put triggers over here, and I can now save this as a new workspace. I'll call it Workspace 1. And now I can toggle between my three different workspaces. There we go. I can also, up here, manage workspaces, and I can rename or delete workspaces that I've created. I'll delete it to get rid of it, and I'll go back to the standard design workspace. So you have complete control over the workspace. One other thing, if you move things around so they're in a place you don't really like them anymore, and you want to reset the workspace, just choose Reset Current Workspace and things go back the way they were. That can be a really useful tool if you move things around and can no longer find the windows and panes that you need. In any case, I'm sure in Visual Studio you've often wanted some way to lay windows out just the way you want them and save those for a later use as a named workspace. Expression Blend makes that possible. If you've used Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, or Flash, the Expression Blend toolbar should feel familiar. If you use Visual Studio, maybe not so much. The toolbar is kind of odd. The following sections work through the tools on the Expression Blend toolbar to try to get you familiar with how they work. We'll start by looking at the Selection tool. This is the most important tool because it allows you to select an object on the artboard. That way you can move, modify, or delete it. This isn't selected by default. If you choose some other tool, you need to manually select it again, and the simplest way is to press the V key, because V stands for selection, of course. Unlike Visual Studio, Expression Blend doesn't select this for you after you place a new control onto the design surface. Click and drag after creating a new control simply creates another instance of the same control. So the selection tool can be very useful And you'll be very frustrated unless you get used to pressing V after you create controls so that you can then select them. The direct selection tool you get to by pressing A allows you to select part of a path or part of a composite object. You'll need this tool when we're working with shapes and paths. And it's important to remember that the selection tool that you get to by pressing V will select the entire object, not just a portion of it. So if you need to select something directly, you need to press A or choose the direct selection tool. Well, before we have a demonstration, we need some tool to work with. We'll work with the pen and pencil tools. The pen tool, you'd press P to get this one, draws connected points. And the pencil tool, Y, draws freehand curves, which are converted to Bezier curves for you. So you draw with the pencil and then Blend neatens it up into nice curves. In both these cases, you can always go back and edit points on the drawings to change the shapes that you've created. You can use these tools to create shapes that aren't symmetric. For rectangles, ellipses, and straight lines, of course, use those tools. But let's stop now and look at the pen and pencil tools and the direct select and selection tools. Here at the top, we'll find the selection tool, and the tip tells you to press V to select it. Here's the direct selection tool. You press A for that one. Down here we have the pen tool. Press P. Now the trick here is to read this carefully. It says, click and hold or right-click for more tools. I spent a long time, because I don't read stuff, just clicking on it and nothing happens. I expected a menu to fly out. I'm clicking, nothing happens. You have to click and hold, and if you do that, you'll see the pen and pencil tools, or you can right-click and you'll see the pen and pencil tools. Again, this is a weird UI that you may not be used to, so you have to just practice for a while. Let's start by using the pen tool. I'll select pen, come over here, and now I'll draw a series of connected points. There's one, there's another, and there we go. And you can see, if you've studied shapes before, that what they're doing is treating this open shape as if it was a closed shape, and they're filling it in with that gray shading so you can see where the shape is. Now let me click and hold one of these points, and it removes it. Let's try again. If I want to click and hold here, I can then add another point to it. And if I click and hold again, I can now drag out the control point for a quadratic Bezier curve, and so I create that curve there. Let's try it again up here. I'm getting curves as I click and hold things, and so I can change the shape of what I've drawn using the pen. Now I can continue adding points if I want. If I do it on this shape now, if I want to close the curve, I just click back on the original point, and that should close it up for me. Now if I want to work with a portion of the curve, I can use the direct selection tool. That allows me to select a portion of that drawing and move it. I'm clicking and dragging to move a portion. Here I can do the same thing. With that portion there. If I use the selection tool, here I can only select the entire shape and move the entire thing around. I can't change just a single line segment within that geometry. So the direct selection tool here makes it easier for me to select just a portion of that drawing. I can also move any point. So if I select a point here, I can move just that one point and change the shape of my drawing. If I want to add a curve, I use Alt-click. Let me try that. Alt-click, and now I should be able to create There it is, a Bezier curve based on that line there. So there are lots of ways you can alter this shape. You'll need to try Alt-click, Shift-click, Control-click, Right-click. There's lots and lots of tools built into Blend, and it's sometimes hard to find the exact right tool. Well, I'm done with these things for now, so I'm going to select them all and delete them. Easiest way is to get the Selection tool. I'll press V, and that brings the Selection tool back up, and I can select both of them in turn and delete them. Let's try the Pencil tool. I'll right-click, choose Pencil, and now I can draw a shape. Let's try a shape like this. It's a little person. You can see I'm a talented artist. There's my shape. And if I want to work with this, I'll press the A for direct selection, and now I can work with any of the points on my curve. I can move any one of them. There we go. And once I touch it, I can modify the Bezier control point there and see how that affects my curve. Notice that Blend took my ragged curve and turned it into a series of Bezier curves. These points act as the endpoints for the Bezier curves that they created, and I can alter any of them at any time just by clicking and dragging and playing with the control points to change how that works. So you're not stuck with what you draw originally. They clean it up for you. But in any case, I'm going to use the V key, select my drawing, and delete it, because for now, I'm done with that drawing. Oh, by the way, you might find it interesting, I used Control Z to bring it back, you might find it interesting to look at the markup you get. As you can see here, we get the mini geometry language that defines all those points that I created in that curve. And it's just a path using the data that I specified with my Pencil tool. Here, it's easier to work with it in the design view, and I'll delete the whole thing, and it's gone. The Pan tool, which you get to by pressing H, allows you to pan around the artboard in case all of it isn't visible. This is helpful for large applications, but you don't need to select the tool. Although it's there, you don't need to use it. Instead, spacebar plus mouse, dragging, selects the tool for you. And so it lets you pan around the artboard. Also, if you double-click the tool in the toolbar, you center the selected object in the artboard. That's an easy way to get things centered in the artboard. The Zoom tool, press Z for that one, allows zooming in or out. And after selecting this tool, you can click to zoom in or Alt-click to zoom out. If you double-click on the tool in the toolbar, you'll zoom to the real size. Let's play with these tools and see what they do. I'll use the Pen tool, I press P to get that, to create a new masterpiece. And now say I want to zoom in on this so I can see it a little better. I press the Zoom key and then click Zooms in. Well, it really did zoom in, didn't it? Let's Alt-click to zoom out, and there it is. We can see it again. Now what if I want to pan around? To do that, I can use the Pan tool and drag things around so I can see whatever I want. Now if I double-click on the Pan tool, that centers the selected object in the center of the artboard. There are a few other tricks here as well. Let's go back to Zoom and zoom in on this. If I double-click the Zoom tool, it zooms it back in so it fits within the artboard. Also, if I've zoomed large, I want to pan around, I don't have to manually choose the Pan tool. Spacebar automatically puts me in pan mode, so I can just pan around this thing by pressing the spacebar. But that's too big, so double-click on Zoom puts it right back to the size that fits within the space I have on my artboard. So you'll want to play with those tools, Pan and Zoom, to see how they react with keystrokes and with clicks. There's lots of tools buried in Blend, and you have to work hard sometimes to find them all. But just try clicking on things. Right-click, double-click, Control-click, Alt-click, and see what happens. Something usually happens when you choose those tools. I did forget to mention in the previous demonstration that if you just scroll with the mouse wheel, you'll also zoom in and out. So you don't have to use the zoom tool if all you want to do is zoom in and out. The eyedropper tool is a useful tool. Press I to get it. It pastes attributes to the selected object or objects from another object. It basically picks up attributes and drops them on another object. The eyedropper and the paint bucket tools, which we'll look at in just a moment, copy the following attributes. Copies these attributes of brushes: foreground, background, border brush, fill, stroke, and opacity mask. It copies these properties dealing with appearance: opacity, stroke thickness, and so on. And it copies these properties dealing with text. So lots of different visual attributes get copied when you use the eyedropper or paint bucket tool. The paint bucket tool, press F to get that, works like the eyedropper, except it copies attributes from the selected object to other objects. You'll see the order of operations, the workflow is different for the two different tools. When using the eyedropper, you select objects you want to alter first, then click on the single object you want to copy from. So say you want to copy from object 1 to object 2, 3, and 4. You select objects 2, 3, and 4 first, and then click on object 1. With the paint bucket, select the object you want to copy from first, and then click on each of the objects you want to copy stuff to. So it's just about the differences in workflow. Okay, let's do a demo. I'll use the pen tool again to create a shape. And maybe use the pencil tool to create some other shapes here, so we have something to work with. And although we haven't talked about using the properties window yet, I think you'll get the concept. I'm going to first select the first shape. Let's select this shape here. And in the properties panel, let's select a color for its fill. I'll select, say, blue. Okay. And let's make a stroke for this. Let's make it red. And the stroke thickness is somewhere. Where would that be? Here it is. Let's set that to 5. So now we have a red border and a blue interior. And now I'd like to apply this same formatting to the other two shapes. To do that, we have a couple of ways we can do it. I can start by selecting those shapes. There they are. They're selected now. And let me use the eyedropper tool. I can select it here or just press I. And when I do that and then click on this, it copies its attributes into the selected shapes. So again, using the eyedropper tool, you select the objects you want to modify first and then click on the thing you want to copy attributes from. The paint bucket works similarly, but different. Let's take one of these shapes. I'm going back to select mode. Let me select this one here, and let's give it a different fill color. We go up to fill and give it a fill color of green. There we are. And maybe a stroke color of blue. There we are. And now I'd like to copy that attribute set to the other two shapes. To make that happen, we select the paint bucket tool first, or press F. And now we have the paint bucket tool. There. Doesn't appear to be a paint bucket. Let me make sure by clicking on the paint bucket. There we are. Must not have pressed the right key. In any case, I'll select the shape here and now click on each of these shapes in turn, and you can see, though the workflow is different, the actual end product is the same. Remember the order in which you do things. With the paint bucket, you click on the one you want to copy from, and then click on the ones you want to copy to. With the eyedropper, you select the ones you want to copy to, and then click on the one you want to copy from. Anyway, you'll get used to the differences. They're very simple to use and useful tools for copying attributes, more than one attribute, from one shape to another. You can create shapes using the rectangle, M, ellipse, L, or line, / tools. The letter tells me what key to press to create those shapes. You get a rectangle, ellipse, or line tools. The toolbar shows the rectangle by default, and to select others you either click and hold or you right-click the currently displayed tool. You can also press the keystroke if you don't want to go back to the toolbar to select that item from the toolbar. Well, let's play with the rectangle, ellipse, and line tools to see what tricks Blend has up its sleeves. I'd like a little more room to work, so I'm going to close some of these windows. I know I can reset them later easily. Let's drag this across. There we are. And let's try the rectangle tool. I can press M to get that, or just click and drag. And you'll notice that I get the same style that I used previously. They remember styles. You can reset those if you like. I can come over here and reset that, and reset that. Back to the defaults, or you can just use them as they were. It doesn't matter for this demonstration. If I create another rectangle and hold the Shift key down while I'm doing it, at this point I'm limited to a square. All I can create is a square if I hold the Shift key down while I'm creating that rectangle. Let me choose L for ellipse and create an ellipse. And now when I create the ellipse, you see the size. If I try it while holding the Shift key down, it can only create a circle. That's interesting. How about the line tool? I'll use the backslash key to get me the line tool, and I'll draw a line. It can be any angle I want. And then if I use the Shift key, you'll see I limit myself to only certain angles. And this is really useful if you want to create a horizontal or a vertical line. Just hold the Shift key down while you're creating it. You're probably wondering where all those other things I created went. Well, if you look up here, you'll see that I've selected no brush at all. If there's no brush, you can't see them. Can I select them all? Let's see. Nope, they just aren't there. If I create, oh, there they are. They're all invisible because I created them without any brush at all. Don't do that. Make sure that you select some brush when you're trying to create an object. It can be a black brush or doesn't matter what it is, but just make sure you give them some brush. So you create them, they don't disappear on you. In any case, I'm done with these for now, so I'll just delete them for the moment. Make sure you investigate the rectangle, ellipse, and line tools and see what happens when you press Shift as you resize those objects. The Brush Transform, or B, and Gradient tool, G, allow you to change the behavior of brushes and gradients. These allow you to visually alter the way brushes and gradients appear, and they're way easier than working in XAML or in Visual Studio. I love these tools. They make things so much easier. Let's take a few moments in Expression Blend and play with the Brush Transform and Gradient tools. To get started with these tools, I'll create a rectangle first. I'll press M to select the rectangle tool, and I'll draw one. I guess the last time I created one, the fill was red. So over here in the Properties panel, I can select No Brush, Solid Color Brush, that's what I have now, a Gradient Brush, a Tile Brush, which lets us display a picture tiled, or use a brush resource. I'm going to choose Gradient Brush, and this by default creates a black to white linear gradient. Notice that it's vertical by default instead of diagonal as in Visual Studio. I'll try the same thing with an ellipse now. I'll press L to bring up the ellipse tool. I'll press Shift and create a circle, and there's an ellipse, and of course because I haven't changed the default fill, I get the same fill, which is a vertical gradient from black to white. Let's try using the Gradient tool. I'll select my rectangle and then press G to get the Gradient tool to appear. The Gradient tool displays the line, the direction of the gradient, and displays the gradient stops as circles filled in with their appropriate color. Now I can move the gradient stops just by dragging these down, and you can see I get the same effect by dragging this pointer here. It changes the same in both places. I can do that for both gradient stops. There we go. If I change the color of the gradient stop, You can see that the circle obviously changes color as well. I can move the angle of the line that defines this gradient. Let's change the color of this circle, not to be black, but to be green, say. There we are. And that's a lovely gradient. And now we've created a gradient, and we've used the gradient tool to change that gradient. If we look at the markup, we'll see that what we've done is change the endpoint and the start point value. We've changed the colors, and we've changed the offsets for those gradient stops. Now we can do the same thing with the circle. I'll choose V to select the circle, and then press G to show the gradient tool. Now this is a linear gradient right now, but I might want a radial gradient. I can get that by here selecting radial gradient, and now I have a radial gradient, and I might want to just swap the colors. To do that, I can use the reverse gradient stops button here, and now it reverses the order of the colors in that gradient. If I want to change that gradient, I can do the same sort of thing I did before. I can move the arrows around wherever I want them. I can move the stop point somewhere else. And I can change the behavior of this gradient. There we go. I get a larger area. I can move this back in, and so on. So you can have fun using the gradient tool to work with your gradient. Now there's one other tool that can be useful here, and that's the brush transform tool. We've created a linear gradient brush here, or a radial gradient brush. What if we need to translate the whole brush, move it to a certain place or rotate it? To do that, I'll press B, there's the brush tool, and now I can rotate the brush, I can move the brush somewhere else, and now we're just altering the way that brush works. So between the two tools, the gradient tool and the brush transform tool, you get a lot of control over how your brushes look. Let me try it over here. Select this one, press B, and now I can do the same thing. I can rotate my gradient. I can move the gradient and get lots of control over the way it looks using that brush transform tool. And of course, all I'm doing is creating markup. You can see what I've done, by the way, is set up a relative transform on that brush. Here's my transform group, and I have a scale transform, a skew transform, a rotate transform, and a translate transform on that gradient brush. Do the same thing down here on the radial gradient brush. This would be difficult to do by hand, but using the tools provided by Expression Blend, you get exact control over what you want, and you generate the markup you need. The rest of the tools on the toolbar work very much like those in Visual Studio, so we'll zip through those pretty quickly. The Layout Controls section includes Grid, Canvas, Stack Panel, and more, and they're all grouped together in a section of Layout Controls. For text controls, there's Text Block, Text Box, and more, and all those text controls are grouped together in one place on the toolbar. For input controls, we have Button, Checkbox, Combo Box, List Box, and all the other input controls, and they're grouped together. You'll also find the Asset Library. This provides access to all controls, including custom controls. It also provides access to resources, media, project elements, styles, and more. It's a place you can go to find any element in your project. There's a lot of stuff in there, so you'll want to filter the asset library to find a particular item. Just start typing and it will filter against what you've typed so far. You can also use the little triangle in the lower right corner to expand the asset library window. Finally, there's the Asset Library Last Used tool, on the theory that if you used it once, you're likely to use it again. After you select an item from the Asset Library, the Last Used tool item on the toolbar displays the most recently used item for easy reuse. Let's take a few moments and investigate each of these items on the toolbar to see how they work. We can look at the end of the toolbar here to investigate the controls we haven't seen yet. Here, if we click and hold, we'll find the various container controls, including grid, canvas, stack panel, wrap panel, dock panel, scroll viewer, border, uniform grid, and view box controls. Here, we'll find the text controls: text block, text box, rich text box, password box, label, and flow document scroll viewer. Down here, we'll find the input controls, including button, checkbox, combo box, list box, radio button, scroll bar, slider, tab control, and grid splitter. But that's not all the controls. We haven't seen every single control. Where are the rest? Well, they figured you won't use those as often, and they're buried in the asset library. You can see here there are 35 controls built in, and they're broken down into various categories. We also have behaviors, little blocks of functionality, so you can mock up an application without writing any code. We have various shapes, effects. We have categories here, some panels, and we have locations down here, places things are stored. Now, if you want to find just a group of controls, say all the controls that have the word box in them, you can just type box, and it filters the list to those controls or assets that contain the word box in their name. You can also expand this out some to get a little more room to work. Also, make sure you clear this out when you're done, or otherwise you won't see all the controls that exist next time you're looking for something. Now, if I do type box and choose, say, date picker text box, that date picker text box appears in the last used item. If I double click it, I'll insert a date picker text box. Let's choose something else, say a button. The date picker text box is still here, and I can choose another one by double clicking. And there we are. So you can see that you can take advantage of the controls in the toolbar plus the asset library to get access to any of the controls built into Expression Blend. The asset library allows you to filter by typing. Don't forget to clear that filter so you can find all the controls you need. Make use of the asset library. It contains access to everything in your project.